Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. This is our second episode of the week. We have 4 episodes this game week, as we will each and every game week. We came to you on Monday with a lot of lessons learned from Penn State's season opener. Mark Brennan, Daniel Gallen joined me here on the podcast to break down what we discovered about Penn State and finally seeing them face somebody else for 60 minutes down in Morgantown. And additionally, some key takeaways from James Franklin's weekly Monday press conference. A lot of coverage at Lions247.com as we continue our game week coverage. We just had some conversations with players this morning on a Wednesday. We'll be back on the practice field later today. So our practice report, full photo gallery, content from James Franklin's post-practice interview will be up on the site Wednesday evening into Thursday. You'll got a lot more coming your way. We'll get ready for this Bowling Green matchup, Penn State's home opener, a bit more here on the show. You'll hear from a Falcons beat reporter who will be traveling to Beaver Stadium to watch Bowling Green play. He was in attendance when they took care of business in their opener of the season, coming to town at 1-0. This is a Bowling Green squad that the last couple of years actually reached a bowl game to finish out its campaign. But it has been a while since we led off the podcast with recruiting news, and we certainly have reason to do that here on a Wednesday, reviewing the early week fireworks for Penn State. Momentum has come immediately after this 1-0 start. Really impressive performance that has garnered some national attention for what they were able to accomplish in a 34-12 victory at West Virginia. And to bring in the latest recruiting news, we welcome Tyler Calvaruso, our resident recruiting expert. Tyler, as I said, a little bit since we've had you on the show, maybe our appearances will be few and far between because we've got so much to focus on with the football program, but they gave us a lot to talk about this show.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be back. And like I told you, I think the last time we talked, I'm trying to find ways to stay relevant here on the pod. So these 25 recruits are giving me a reason to circle back with you. So glad to be here. It's been a fun 4 or 5 day stretch going back to Saturday. Penn State did what it did at West Virginia, set a pretty clear message. I think James Franklin nailed those coordinator hires and parlay that into some recruiting success. So we've got a lot to get into.
Yeah, let's jump right into it, and we'll work our way back in terms of the timeline. So we'll go with the second commitment of the week first, and that was Malachi Goodman, long prized offensive lineman out of New Jersey, had USC, Auburn among his finalists. Penn State, though, is the pick. Brian Doan has a story at Lions247.com here breaking down the inside workings of that recruitment and why the Nittany Lions were ultimately able to prevail. Look, Goodman's been the name that you have gone to whenever we talked about offensive line for what feels like the last couple of months. So how big of a win is this for Penn State? And ultimately, is this one that you forecasted going into August versus where we are coming into September, or did Penn State help itself in recent weeks?
Before I dive into Goodman, Brian's coverage of this recruitment has been unmatched. The amount of insight that he has provided into Goodman's decision-making process, really from the start, going back to early August when it looked like he might wrap things up there, it's been tremendous. And if you haven't gotten the chance to catch up with any of Brian's pieces on our side, I definitely recommend it. But from our end with Goodman, if you're a Penn State fan, you got to tip your cap to Phil Jarwin, as is the case really multiple times recently here. Going back to the summer when he landed Kevin Brown, now he scores another huge recruiting win in Malachi Goodman. Make no mistake about it, Goodman was probably the top remaining overall target on Penn State's board, especially when it came to the uncommitted guys. He is a very, very good prospect. And Penn State had to fight off some big dogs in this recruitment. Auburn came on really, really strong with Goodman dating back to the spring. Tigers developed a good relationship with the New Jersey native, and hey, he almost went down to SEC country. USC fought for as long as it could as well. Goodman made it out to LA for a visit during the summer, during official visit season, as he did with Auburn at Penn State. Trojans made an impression, but at the end of the day, it really came down to relationships for Goodman, and his relationship with Phil Jarwin was top-notch, I think, as we really touched on throughout his recruitment. It was made clear to Goodman, essentially from the start, when Penn State jumped in with its offer going back to October 2023, that, hey, look, you're wanted here. We feel like we could really develop you and get you to where you need to be. And as time went on, the two got more and more comfortable on a personal level. And I really just got to give Jarwin a lot of credit for what he accomplished in this recruitment. So, he's been killing it on the trail for the Nittany Lions recently, and now Penn State, another big-time addition to its 2025 class here late in the cycle. I know there was a lot of movement with the group, June official visit season, trickling into July, early days of August as well, but The cycle doesn't end in the summer. It continues in here to the fall, and you're seeing it with big-time pickup for Goodman.
Goodman becomes Penn State's top-rated recruit on the offensive side of the ball for the 2025 cycle. He's number 125 in our rankings at 24/7 Sports, the number 6 interior offensive line prospect, and the number 3 player out of the state of New Jersey. That's 4 guys from the Garden State who are now in this class, Tyler. You look at Goodman out of Paramus Catholic, and then St. Joe's Regional gives you Jameer Johnson at cornerback. You've got Michael Troutman out of DePaul Catholic, another interior offensive lineman. And then from South Jersey, Braswell Thomas, who we think is going to play safety for the Nittany Lions. This is an area, and I know Phil Troutwine is a native from that region, but coming into this cycle, it felt like there was ground to make up. What do you make of the ability of Penn State to put together a relatively large chunk of its recruiting class out of New Jersey?
Yeah, definitely getting back into the Garden State has been a priority for James Franklin and his staff. You've seen that with the sports staff of Khalil Ahmad. He does a great job behind the scenes for the Nittany Lions. He's got a ton of ties in New Jersey. So there's been a concerted effort to get back into New Jersey in these recent cycles. And part of that has to do with, quite frankly, there were a few cycles where the talent was maybe a little bit down in Jersey, maybe not what we've been accustomed to it being. But this 25 group in Jersey is really, really good. And Penn State has capitalized on that. Goodman is one of the state's best. He's arguably the best in the state, depending on who you talk to. He's a mauler. He's strong, good, versatile, as I said earlier. Can play tackle, can swing inside, play on the interior if need be. Sound mechanically, still developing physically. But he's 6'5". We have him listed here 24/7. So there's a lot to like about this get from the prospect perspective. And again, anytime Penn State can make some noise with a high-level recruit in North Jersey, it opens eyes because, there have been some trials and tribulations recruiting in the area. There have been some misses. There have been some wins. This one goes down as a win for Penn State. Paramus Catholic is another North Jersey program where, everyone knows they had their run with Jabril Peppers where they were the elite of the elite in North Jersey. Went on the downturn a little bit, but now they're starting to surface a little bit more back to the forefront. Got guys like Goodman. So, the more schools you're in North Jersey, the better relationships you have in North Jersey, the better it's going to be for your class. And you're seeing that here in 2025. Same goes for South Jersey as well, Braswell Thomas. Penn State's not just recruiting the northern part of the state. They're going after the guys in central and south as well.
Yeah, but you mentioned Brian Doan's covers before. He had a story up on Tuesday, late Tuesday, about Penn State getting a couple of prospects in their pocket here during the commitment class or during the 2025 recruiting class construction from programs that haven't really been helpful to Penn State with frequency. And you've got Paramus Catholic, as you said, that there's a lot of history there with them producing power conference players. And maybe they're getting back into their, kind of that mode of late. And then the other one is St. Joe's Prep, which perennially is one of the top ranked teams in the country. And the previous flip that Penn State pulled off, we're going to talk about the latest flip they pulled off in wide receiver Matthew Outen. But the one they pulled off last month was Cameron Smith from St. Joe's Prep in Philadelphia. He flipped his commitment from Duke. He's also a top 24/7 talent. So how much stock do you put into what Brian wrote about it? And Penn State trying to hammer home the point that they are the go-to destination for the best players in the region. I know James Franklin has been very public in his assessment of who they should be bringing to campus and why. What do you think about doing it with a couple, potential pipeline programs there where if you are able to get in the groove at a Paramus Catholic or at a St. Joe's Prep in Philadelphia, that could be something that really helps you on an annual basis?
Put a ton of stock into it because the fact of the matter is if you want to be the best program in the region and you want to get the best players from the region, you're going to have to recruit the top high school programs in the region. There are plenty of instances where there's talent scattered around the state. Look no further than Pennsylvania for that example. You got the Philly guys, you got the Central PA guys, you got the Pittsburgh guys that Penn State goes after so far. And I just mentioned the deal in Jersey with, north, south, central part of the state. But at the end of the day, you're going to come across a lot of the same programs on the recruiting trail, especially when it comes to the programs that are right there in your backyard within your regional footprint. You're seeing that this cycle. Penn State is recruiting the best program in Philadelphia. St. Joe's Prep is what it is. They're one of the best in Philly. Same goes for Imatep. That's another program in Philly where Penn State makes concerted effort to recruit every single cycle. Central Catholic in Pittsburgh, same deal. So you're going to have to be in with the top programs in your regional recruiting footprint. And you're seeing that come to fruition for Penn State here this cycle. Getting back in at St. Joe's Prep, and we've touched on this a bunch, so I'm not going to do a whole diatribe on it, but it was huge. There was no doubt about it. It was huge. When you could, you put it perfectly. When you could send James Franklin, Tom Allen, those guys down to Philly, they're on the sideline watching one of your commits. It sent a message that, hey, look, maybe we haven't been getting guys from this program in recent history. Things are changing. We're back. We're going to make some noise. We're going to be in on your top guys, and we're going to have a legitimate chance at those top guys. So I think just all in all, the way kind of the end of this cycle has come together for Penn State when it comes to the high school programs they're involved with. Some really encouraging stuff on the trail.
We've got a lot more to talk about in terms of how this recruiting class is growing, but I want to finish off with Goodman by just reflecting on what this means for the offensive line class. You mentioned the size, 6'5", 315. We already talked about the rankings. He's considered one of the premier interior offensive line prospects nationally. How does he fit with what they already have? And is this kind of a close-up shop moment for the 2025 offensive line class?
Never want to say close up shop just because the staff's always going to keep an eye on those late risers, maybe circle back on some guys who are having second thoughts on their current school. But, I think Goodman really takes this haul for Phil Trautman from good to great. There are some, not necessarily questions with the group, but maybe some guys who are a little bit more projectable. Brady O'Hara playing tight end so much during his prep career up in North Catholic in Pittsburgh. How is he going to translate to tackle at the next level? We've seen him make strides on the camp fields at Penn State during the summer, but you don't know how that's going to go until the guy gets there. Owen Alacina, he's blossoming quite nicely. But again, still a guy new to the sport, still learning, still fine-tuning his skill set. And Michael Trautman, who's a really solid interior prospect, also from New Jersey, as you mentioned earlier. So adding a top 24/7 prospect, a top 150 prospect at that to this group, it just takes an already really solid group to another level, in my opinion. I think that's the kind of player Goodman is. Whether it was Penn State, Auburn, or USC, someone was going to get a really, really good offensive lineman, one who I think is going to make a high level of impact at the next level. And Phil Trautman has definitely agreed with that assessment, with the manner in which he has prioritized Goodman throughout the cycle. So again, you're just moving up the notch. You're taking it to a next level with this addition. Penn State's offensive line haul for this 25 class looks pretty good now.
It's a group that will follow a 5-man class from the 2024 unit. Of course, Cooper Cousins is the headliner there, but you like the developmental pieces you have at tackle, and Egan Boyer, Garrett Sexton, the developmental pieces you have inside with Donnie Harbor and Caleb Brewer, and now the next group on its way, and we'll start to see them join this roster in January. Big pickup in Goodman. If it weren't for Goodman, Matthew Outen would still be the top-ranked offensive commit in this class, because he joined it on Monday. He initially committed to Virginia Tech. That happened in the summer, and you and I, in the aftermath of that, came on this podcast, and it was right there with the Lex Cyrus commitment to South Carolina in a similar time frame. And we spent a whole segment really breaking down some misses on the recruiting trail wide receiver and how that might reflect on Marcus Hagans. And now here we are coming out of a game in which they showed legitimate improvement at the position, starring Harrison Wallace and what he was able to accomplish down at West Virginia. Now they do add that top target and Matthew Outen. He flips over. And by the way, Virginia Tech is where he was committed. They lost their home opener in upset to Vanderbilt in overtime. So it adds up to Penn State picking up Outen. The next day they get Malachi Goodman, but we already addressed him. How important is this one for Penn State and Hagans?
It was huge for Hagans, given some of the dialogue that we were seeing on our boards, really, after the summer, in which some things did not go Penn State's way on the recruiting trail at wide receiver. This is a big time get for the Nittany Lions and Hagans. There's no doubt about it. And you could see just by the social media reaction after this came together for Penn State, at least publicly, when Outen went public with this decision to flip, there are a lot of people who like what Hagans is doing internally, and there's a lot of support for him. There was a ton of support for him on social media after that get. And look, Outen's balling. It's pretty. You turn on the film, you could see why he was one of the top names on Marcus Hagans' board throughout the cycle. He spent his junior season in Virginia at IC Norcom High, making a high level of impact in all three phases. But when it comes to his future and what he could accomplish at the next level, wide receiver looks like the spot for him, and his elite level speed is a big reason why. really fast kid for his 6 foot, 200-pound frame. There's a reason Andrew Ivins, our director of scouting here at 24/7, placed him on his freaks list. He's just one of those guys. His athletic makeup and his athletic profile is elite. And Penn State never gave up. Even after he went off the board to Virginia Tech in early July, the door was left nudged open, and the Penn State staff took advantage of that to the best of its ability. It wasn't just Hagens either. I mentioned the support staff earlier. You can see in some of the article pictures we've been using over at Lions 24/7 covering this out. Khalil Ahmad's a guy who spent a lot of time with Alton on his official visit. And those two have a good relationship. Kenny Sanders, anytime you're talking about a guy from that DMV area, Virginia area, he's going to be involved. And he's played a part in all of this. So group effort for Penn State. But again, this is just a crucial one for Marcus Hagens. And for him to go out and make noise in this manner, especially coming off the performance that Penn State pieced together at West Virginia with its wide receivers making a high level of impact, he's got to be feeling pretty good right now.
Yeah, you mentioned the three phases, what he can do. I know you mentioned that when you shared his highlights at Lions247.com this week. And he is technically the number 5 athlete in 24/7 sports rankings. He's the number 139 overall. So make the case for him as an athlete, considering what he can do on the field, and then narrowing focus. Why is he a big pickup at the receiver spot specifically?
So I mentioned the athletic upside and the athletic profile. His testing numbers are legit. And you watch his film, watch him working on defense. Size-wise, if he were to wind up on defense at the next level, you look at him as maybe one of those hybrid-type safety linebacker guys. He's a big, strong kid, moves well in space, does well in coverage, had made an impact on special teams well as a return man, and even on blocking punts. He had a block punt as a junior. But wide receiver, with that being the projection, I think the biggest reason, and you could really place Alton on defense, in my opinion, at the next level, he'd be perfectly fine. I think he could play that position at a high level. I think he'd still be a top 24/7 guy if he projected on defense at the next level. But wide receiver, it's the athleticism. It's the combination of size and speed, really, because he's a physical specimen as an outside receiver. He blows past guys with his speed. It's not just the speed that gets him to that point either. He's quick off the line, good release, knows how to deal with press coverage when that's what he's facing, uses his hands well to get off press coverage in that regard, has a nice catch radius with his wingspan. So there's just really an overwhelming amount to like with Alton at wide receiver at the next level. And, when you're welcoming a guy into your class and you look at him and say, hey, he could be an impact guy on either side, depending on, what happens. You always want to add elite level athletes like that. That's what Penn State went out and accomplished here.
At 6'2", 200 pounds, we got some interesting data points from Andrew Ivins, who's 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting. You mentioned that he was featured in those top 50 freaks of the 2025 class, and in this case, freaks is a very good thing. He's one of 2 members of this Penn State class on that list, along with edge rusher Jaden Woods out of Kansas. But just some of those data points that I found very interesting. Back in January at the National Combine in his home state of Virginia, there were more than 1,000 kids at that event, and he had the second fastest 40-yard dash time in the 4.5 range. Ivan said that's traditionally a slower surface for 40-yard dash times. And he said that Alton also, as they compiled their data for that freaks piece, among players who are 200-plus pounds in this 2025 class, he's got the fastest 55-meter dash and the second fastest 60-meter dash to his credit. And this is an evolving athlete as well, as now he's into his senior season of high school. And when we look at this receiver group, started a long time ago with Lyric Samuel back last winter. There have been additions since then, multiple of the blue chip variety. When you look at the last couple, where are we with the receiver class at this stage?
Keep some irons on the fire where you can. I know Penn State really likes the 4-man group it has at this point. Welcoming Alton again on board, huge. It's a similar deal to the offensive line. Takes a good group to probably a great group. Alton's just one of those guys. So he has that kind of impact, and he provides that kind of boost to your recruiting class. But, if there is an opportunity to add with a guy like Lex Cyrus, South Carolina commit in-state guy, if that door remains open and Penn State can make a move, they're still working on it. So, maybe later in the cycle, that's something that could come together from the Nittany Lions. Effort is going to continue to be poured into that recruitment probably until signing day. As Penn State does when it's trying to flip a guy. They're going to put in effort as long as they feel they have a chance. And with Cyrus, they're, again, going back to his original commitment to South Carolina during the summer, there were still plenty of people who wanted to see him at Penn State. So maybe as time goes on, it gets a little bit more real for Cyrus as the beginning of the early signing period approaches. We've mentioned that before. Some guys, it gets closer, you realize you're going away from home. You kind of have that, oh crap, realization. You start reconsidering things. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen for Cyrus, but it does happen with some guys. And Penn State's going to be there until the end. So they'll be giving them something to think about. At least they'll be doing that to the best of their ability as a staff.
You mentioned Cyrus still being in those crosshairs. We've talked about a couple commitment flips that have come through. Matthew Outen at wide receiver. Before that, the aforementioned linebacker from St. Joe's Prep and Cameron Smith. And these guys have joined the group. And so we're wondering, is there more possibilities out there? Penn State have some fishing lines cast out there in the sea, certainly. And Brian Doan broke down some of this at Lions247.com this week. You just brought up one of those names in Lex Cyrus, but he's not alone.
Nah, it wasn't a flipboard that started and ended with Cam Smith and Matthew Outen. There are still guys Penn State would like to make a move on. Zahir Mathis, we've talked about him a bunch. And we're going to continue talking about him a bunch because another situation where Penn State's going to be on that one till he signs somewhere. And that means Deion Barnes continuing to lead the charge to try and get him back to campus and make that move. And again, when Penn State is hosting a recruit twice in as many months during the summer, with one of those visits being an official visit, and he's committed elsewhere, it's notable. It speaks to the effort of the staff, and it speaks to the level of interest from the recruit. Now, do I expect anything imminent with Mathis? No, I think this is going to be a little bit more of a slow burn. I feel like it's one of those deals where he probably doesn't even really have a reason to move off his commitment so early, if that is what he's going to decide to do. Because we've talked about this again ad nauseum. He could get back to Ohio State for his official visit. That is yet to take place. So with another trip to Columbus actually in store, that could be a moment where the Buckeyes re-solidify things with him. But again, Penn State is going to stick with him. Deion Barnes is going to continue to lead this push, and we will see where things go. And then in the secondary, Brandon Finn, the Oregon cornerback commit. I'll tell you one thing, Kenny Sanders is not giving up on a McDonough kid. It's just not going to happen, especially one that Penn State really, really wanted the first time around, and they really, really liked his game. They're not going to be giving up. And Terry Smith, Sanders, the rest of the staff, they're going to be continuing to lead that push. Won't be easy, but they're going to stay in on him.
And, of course, they've got his teammate Jeff Exeter Jr. on board. They've got a bunch of McDonough history, guys that are all over the field right now for them from that program, starting lineup. But Finney, just to review here for folks, Finney is a top 100 overall prospect. He's number 11 at the cornerback position, committed to Oregon back in June. We talked a lot about Lex Cyrus, the four-star receiver here out of the state of Pennsylvania, who committed to South Carolina back in the summer. And then Zahir Mathis, long ago, I think he was the initial number one recruit in the state of Pennsylvania. He's number 3 at this point, but he's number 132 overall out of the Imhotep Institute, where Penn State has had a lot of recent success in bringing players on board. He's the number 16 edge rusher nationally. Tyler, we'll see what happens with those flip possibilities. I just want to finish here with the 2025 class conversation, because we already saw maybe what a strong opening performance could give them in terms of an uptick on the recruiting trail. What do you think if they're able to, and the schedule looks very manageable for the next month, but if they're able to build on this, show some of that explosive play action on offense, show off continued dominance on defense, and you reach mid-October, everyone's starting to focus in on the college football playoff race, which is going to be expanded. If they have that cool factor, and I've said before, cool factor does mean something in recruiting. It doesn't always mean you're going to be the team that they sign with, but if you don't have the cool factor, it can hurt you. And so if Penn State's carrying cool factor and they're inside the top of national rankings this year, and they've got that buzz, how do you think that plays out? How do you think that correlates on the recruiting trail, specifically talking about the final push of this 2025 class, which has 3 months now before National Signing Day?
I'm glad you mentioned the cool factor, because it honestly does matter. I know we'll probably say, it might sound crazy to some people, but there are some guys who just flat out want to play in a fun offense. They want to play for an offense that's putting up a lot of points and, it looks dynamic in the passing game. They want to play for a defense that's generating turnovers and flying the football and playing with emotion, as I think everyone definitely saw with some of those hot mics during the West Virginia game. So there's definitely a ton of passion on both sides of the ball from Penn State. You got to be part of that kind of thing. So I think it is important And I think if the ball keeps rolling in the right direction as I anticipate it will. I mean, I gave a pretty lofty prediction for this season when we did our predictions here at Lions 24/7.
Yeah, Tyler went 11-1. You already heard from me, Daniel, and Mark last week. We all went 10-2. But yeah, Tyler was the leader of the pack in terms of optimism.
I went 11-1 because, quite frankly, I wasn't yet sold on USC's defense after watching that LSU game. We'll see where that one goes. That's gonna be tough for the Nittany Lions. But yeah. Back to the focus of the conversation. Yeah, I think if things keep going as they're going and Penn State keeps rolling, maybe some guys who weren't quite as serious about Penn State as a destination, or maybe weren't listening as closely or paying attention as closely, you could see the tide start to. I think it'll start to turn a little bit in that regard.
Well, we'll keep tabs on that. If the wins rack up and the momentum builds, then yeah, I think there will be some new opportunities that could surface on the recruiting trail for Penn State down the stretch here. I do want to follow up with you on that West Virginia game because you had a piece up on Sunday at Lions247.com that was specifically about some of the things you heard from defensive targets on the recruiting board for the Nittany Lions and the way they felt about how that defense performed down in Morgantown. What were you hearing coming out? Because we were all curious what it might look like after 2 years with Manny Diaz. Certainly wasn't any drop-off apparent on Saturday afternoon.
No. I think the recruits who were in attendance on West Virginia's behalf recognized that Penn State was rolling out 2 new coordinators. And there was definitely a lot of intrigue surrounding how those coordinators would perform, how their respective units would look. Defensively, kind of the same story. The defense really just picked up where it left off under Manny Diaz. You saw a lot of the similarities and a lot of the reasons why Penn State's defense has been considered a strength show up again in that West Virginia game. The recruits in attendance, they definitely took notice, and we had some reactions from prospects, defensive prospects who were on board with that West Virginia home opener visit, and they loved what they saw out of Penn State. Same deal on offense. I didn't get the chance to write an article about this necessarily, but I've had some brief conversations with recruits on the offensive side of the ball who really praise Andy Kotelnicki's offense, praise the creativity, praise just the overall look of the system and the way he made things easy for Drew Aller at times, the way he schemed him into comfortable situations. So really, this was just an overwhelmingly positive weekend for Penn State, especially with those 2 new coordinators coming in.
Tyler had some good stuff up earlier this week at Lions247.com. I know that you'll continue to tap into those connections as we come out of the next game. And there'll be a lot more guys in attendance watching Penn State at this point. But you were doing a good work to catch up with some of those who were technically guests of West Virginia last Saturday. But what they saw was very good for Penn State. Tyler, let's switch gears and finish this segment with focus on this first home game. We're going to talk about Bowling Green in depth in just a moment with someone who covers them on a daily basis. But from a recruiting perspective, this means that we kick off 7 different Saturdays this fall where Penn State's going to have a chance to bring prospects, their families, show them a great time before the game, after the game, and hopefully during those 60 minutes of football, give them more reasons to ultimately pick Penn State when it's their turn to announce commitments. So let's go through a few names that we need to know, and we'll start the list with a 2026 prospect in the state. He's considered the number 3 player in Pennsylvania among high school juniors. Matt Sieg out of Fort Cherry High School, a safety prospect, number 12 nationally and number 140 overall.
I almost spoiled this conversation because I almost mentioned him when discussing those guys who visited for the West Virginia game. I almost dove into that. I held off, though. I showed some self-control. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just dive right into it. But, he's one of those guys Penn State's been after for a while. We all keep the best guys in Pennsylvania. Matt Sieg's one of those guys. He's a high-level safety prospect, high on that board for Anthony Poindexter. He's going to be getting back to campus on Saturday. First time in a little bit for him, actually. A lot of that had to do with his summer baseball schedule. Really good baseball player. And he was busy with his team throughout the summer. And when he did have a second to make a visit, went to Rutgers and got to see a program that he hadn't gotten the chance to see before, really. That was a big positive in his recruitment, positive experience. Wisconsin, he got to check out, I believe, leading into the summer. That's a program high on his list. But he's one of those dudes who has been to Penn State so often early in his recruitment. He kind of already has a firm grasp of the lay of the land. He has good relationships with the staff, good relationship with Poindexter, good relationship with Terry Smith, who anytime we're talking about a kid from that Pittsburgh area, Terry Smith's going to be in the mix. He's been in the mix here. Family has a good relationship with the staff. So Penn State keeps going at the rate that it's going. with Matt Sieg. He's someone I could see in this 2026 class when it's all said and done. He still has some visits to make, no doubt about that. He's actually going to be seeing West Virginia again when they travel to Pittsburgh for the backyard brawl. But Penn State's sitting pretty nicely here, and they're going to get a chance to continue building on that this weekend.
When you look at those composite rankings for Pennsylvania's 2026 class, Penn State already on the board with number 1 on that list, Harrisburg offensive lineman Kevin Brown. Number 3 on that list, Harrisburg running back Messiah Mickens, and a big name to know in the state, and Matt Sieg. And as you mentioned, back-to-back Saturdays, he will see Penn State in action. Last week, he was down in Morgantown as a recruiting visitor with West Virginia. Now he returns to Beaver Stadium. So good opportunity to send a lot his way in an 8-day span here, give him plenty to consider. Moving from Sieg to another in-state prospect in the 2026 class, someone who has not been on our radar as long, someone who does not have a lot of the cachet and national rankings right now. In fact, I believe he remains unrated/unranked at 24/7 Sports. But an offensive lineman in that 2026 group, Tavion Branch. Tell us what we need to know about the big fella and how he might fit into Penn State's plans.
I think that ranking deal will change here relatively soon because he's pretty firmly on that Power 4 radar, built really well as an offensive line prospect at 6'3", around 280. He's a really strong kid. His physical makeup and composition, it's what you want it to be early in his junior year. So that's a huge plus for him. And I think that's a big reason why he is where he is in his recruitment with programs like Penn State and other P4s getting more involved, extending offers. And Phil Troutman worked Branch out a bunch this summer. He traveled to campus multiple times, worked Branch out at the conclusion of Branch's last bash visit inside of Haluba Hall. That's what led to the offer from Penn State, and Nittany Lions have stayed on him. He's another one with positional versatility, I believe, for next level. I like him as a tackle. I think his footwork is where it needs to be in that regard. He moves pretty well. He can also be an interior guy for Penn State or any other program at the next level. So lots to like with Branch. Another chance where in-state guy, you're making some positive strides early. You get him back this weekend.
I'm thinking of the tackles that they brought in lately, and he's, I think the length and the height is at a different place maybe than some of those guys, the prototypical guys that Phil Troutman has brought in. But you're right. It looks like he can have various pathways to playing time. He has some serious strength at his size. He's out of Riverside High School in Lackawanna County here in Pennsylvania. And Tyler, we're going to shift gears and talk about maybe the premier offensive lineman in the region in the 2027 class, Max Hiller, guy that you and I both had a chance to see get a ton of reps at a Penn State camp this summer. Naturally, Nittany Lions coaches came away from that firmly entrenched in their belief that this guy is a priority for them in the 2027 class. He's out of Coatesville. He's the number 3 offensive tackle in our rankings. He's the number 1 player in our rankings at 24/7 Sports for Pennsylvania early on in the 2027 class. And I'll throw the caveat, he's only a high school sophomore. We got a ways to go in learning what he means and ultimately how good he is. But the offer sheet is there. Penn State interest is certainly there. And this is a guy that our rankings council at 24/7 Sports believes is among the very best in America. I think he was a first-team Max Preps all-freshman pick last year in 2023. So anytime he steps foot on campus, I'm interested. And Penn State wants to keep building that early foundation like they did in the 2026 class. It paid off with Kevin Brown. Max Hiller, maybe that kind of a presence for them on the offensive line recruiting board.
I'll tell you what, when they make a sophomore 6'5" and 300 pounds, I'm definitely interested too. He's elite, man. He really is. Like we watch him work,
and he can move. There's some sophomores out there who are 6'5", 300+ pounds, and they're not coordinated, and they don't have anger, and they don't bring it into the competition. We saw it. He's angry. He wants to beat the guy across from him, and the footwork comes together really well for a kid who's that big as a high school sophomore.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be a tackle at the next level, but we saw him work on the inside in camp as well. And I mean, man, his agility and his footwork, it's at a really high level. And this was even before the beginning of the sophomore season, leading into it. So he's a high-end prospect, man, and Penn State is approaching him as such. He's one of those ones where we've already seen an early commitment in the 27 class with Keemont Spell. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Max Hiller because based on conversations I've had, it seems like he's a little bit further off. He's going to continue making visits, all that good stuff that comes along with the recruiting process. But he visited twice in 5 days in late July when he made his last bash visit. And then he got back just before the beginning of that August dead period, watched Penn State's first fall practice. Now he's coming back from the home opener. We start to stack visits like that, it kind of speaks for itself, right, in terms of where the level of interest is. And the relationships here are in a good place early. And it's not just Phil Troutline where the relationship's in a good place. Every time Hiller goes to campus, pretty much his approach has been get to know a different member of the staff. From my conversation with him, every time he's in town, he's talking to someone different and trying to form a relationship with them. So building that overall level of comfort and level of trust with the staff, those are the people you're going to be around on a daily basis inside of Lash if you decide to call Penn State home. So Hiller's making a concerted effort to make sure he's comfortable with not just Phil Troutman and the on-field staff, but the guys who he's going to see every single day if he decides to call State College home. So, again, it's early, but things are trending really, really nicely for Penn State in the early going.
The conversation with this 2027 offensive line target board really begins with Hiller and extends to Delaware standout Leighton Von Brandt. Both of them have been frequent visitors to Happy Valley, and this 2027 class got kickstarted about a month ago with Kaman Spell out of McKeesport High School here in Pennsylvania, considered a top 5 running back recruit nationally in that 2027 cycle. We got one more name to get to, and it keeps us in the 2027 cycle, and it keeps us within those top 100 rankings that 24/7 Sports put out late in the summer, referencing the cream of the crop as it's seen right now among high school sophomores nationally. Miles McAfee, wide receiver recruit out of Archbishop Spalding High School. He's out of the D.C. area, number 91 overall, number 13 wide receiver in the country, according to 24/7 Sports for that cycle. He's almost to a double-digit offer total at this point. And Penn State among the several programs who did not hesitate to present a scholarship.
So I saw McAfee in Baltimore Under Armour camp in May. You guys saw him at Penn State Elite Showcase camp in June. Didn't matter where we saw him because it was the same thing both camps. He was probably the best receiver in attendance. That includes the upperclassmen who were on the fields that day. I mean, he in his sophomore season debut, his Archbishop Spalding debut down in Maryland, catching passes from Malik Washington, the Maryland quarterback commit. He was going up against Elbert Hill, who's one of the top 26 cornerbacks in the nation. He's on that Penn State radar for Terry Smith. All he did was score 3 touchdowns against Hill. No big deal. Just a nice, calm sophomore season debut and a win for Archbishop Spalding. I think that's kind of all I have to say about the kind of prospect McAfee is. That top 100 ranking, well-deserved. Think he's a guy who could rise. He's around 5'11", 180 right now, I believe. Fast kid, really attacks the ball downfield. Good route runner. Penn State's off to a strong start here as well. This one, it's really, really early. He's still going to be feeling these offers for, I'd say, an extended period of time. Yeah. So we will see where things go. But one thing that stood out to me with McAfee for my most recent conversation with him was he really enjoyed working with Marcus Hagans and Mark Dupuis during camp. So that's something he's going to carry with him. That's something that tends to stick in the back of your head as a prospect, especially when you get the camp offer early and you garner the experience of what it's like to work with your potential future position coach and another guy who's going to be working with you at the next level as well, Mark Dupuis. It's notable, and his relationship with those two is in a good spot, and he's going to keep working on that relationship with James Franklin and the rest of the staff this weekend.
Dupuis is an offensive analyst, works closely with those wide receivers, especially on the camp circuit as well with some of those prospects. So some names to know there. There's a bunch more. We have a lot of coverage coming your way at Lions247.com. And by the way, that Archbishop Spalding program that he is excelling at, and that's the same program that produced current starting safety Zakee Wheatley, I think 4 or 5 cycles ago, and he's been an impact player for Penn State. Tyler, we appreciate the coverage as always. I know you got a lot more at Lions247.com. We'll get you back on during the bye week next week. We'll cover some more ground on the recruiting trail. We'll take a look at some of the early standout performances from Penn State commits across the country and a lot more to get to. But thanks for hopping on with us today.
Thanks for having me back, man. It was a good time.
As promised, we're going to turn our attention toward Penn State's next opponent with this second segment of the episode. We will be joined now by Michael Burwell, who covers the Bowling Green squad for the Toledo Blade. He will actually be making the trip to Beaver Stadium, so we will look forward to welcoming you into our press box. But before we get to Saturday, we want to get to know the Falcons program. They started 1-0 with an impressive victory over Fordham. Of course, that's a FCS foe, so this is a major jump up for Bowling Green. But Michael, thank you so much for taking the time with us this week.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
Well, we just discussed before we started recording that power conference opponents isn't anything out of the ordinary for Bowling Green. They had 3 of them last year. They were only down 14-6 on the road in Ann Arbor against Michigan early on in the season. Of course, Michigan goes on to win the national championship. They went out and really blew the doors off Georgia Tech when they were a significant underdog in that matchup. And then later on, they played Minnesota in a bowl game that they lost. Finished 7-6 last year, but 3 Power 5 opponents last year. Now we're down to Power 4, but they've got 2 of them on the regular season schedule. Beaver Stadium this weekend, bye week, and then a trip down to Kyle Field at Texas A&M. So can we start there? Bowling Green clearly has embraced and is willing to go and play these, for them, what are showcase games that most people externally aren't going to give them much of a shot.
Right. Yeah, they've really embraced, playing big time opponents. I mean, they've pulled off some really, wild wins. You look at the Georgia Tech game last year. I mean, they really dominated most of that game, and even the bowl game against Minnesota. That was a game that BG honestly probably should have won. Just a couple tough plays later in the game, Minnesota was able to get a couple scores late. But even a couple years ago, 2021, I believe, BG, they were kind of in some tough times. There was a really tough rebuild for them when head coach Scott Loeffler took over in 2019. But in 2021, they went to Minnesota and won 14-10 as 31-point underdogs. So they really just, I don't know if it's some extra motivation, but they really enjoy playing these, power conference opponents.
What is the early mood? I know that we're just getting rolling with our coverage week. You and I are talking on a Tuesday afternoon, so I'm not sure how many conversations you've actually had with Bowling Green's players or coaches to this point, but can you kind of set the stage for the significance of this opportunity for the Falcons?
Yeah. I mean, they're definitely excited for it, and they definitely have a lot of respect for Penn State. Obviously, Scott Loeffler, BG's coach, a former Michigan quarterback, coached in the Big Ten as well, has had a lot of different coaching gigs and power conferences. He knows a lot about Penn State. He just has a lot of respect for them, and I mean, he flat out said in a press conference recently, he thinks this is the best Penn State team he's seen in a really long time. So I think that's kind of the general mood is just there's a lot of respect, obviously. And, getting to play, in an environment like Penn State, they're looking forward to that too. Obviously last year at Michigan, there's 100,000 people there. It's jam packed. It was played on a Saturday night, and they came out of the gates and, there may have been a couple jitters, but there's a lot of pretty good plays. So I think just overall, the opportunity to get to play in an environment like this against an opponent that they really respect. I think that's kind of the mood as far as early on in the week.
Penn State and Bowling Green have only played twice. We're decades removed from their last meeting. And so we'll be honest with you, a lot of our listening audience doesn't really know much about the Falcons at this point. Penn State's considered a 31.5-point favorite. At least that's what I saw initially on Sunday when that spread came out. But can you kind of make the case for why momentum is working in Bowling Green's favor? Just looking at year by year under their current head coach, I see they go 3-9 year one. They don't win a game in the shortened 2020 season. They go 4-8 in 2021. But the last couple years, they go 6-6 in the regular season, get to a bowl game. They go 7-5 in the regular season, get to a bowl game. So does it feel like there's been a bit of a stepping stone process for this program?
Yeah, absolutely. Scott Loeffler took over. I mean, it was when he took over in 2019, it was, one of the worst programs in the country. They had 2 really bad seasons before that. So he really just did not have much to work with. And it's been a really slow rebuild. I mean, he said it when he took over, it's going to be 3, 4, 5-year process to get to a respectable point. But, each year there were some signs of good things happening. The Minnesota win was huge. They beat rival Toledo a couple times. And then like last year, beating Georgia Tech and then getting to a couple bowl games the last couple years was huge as well for the program. So they've made huge strides. Maybe, even last year, there were a couple games they probably should have won, and they just sometimes, they're inconsistent. 1 week they'll show up and play really well. Next week they'll just play terribly, and it's a completely different team. So, but they finished last year really strong. I think they won 5 of their last 6 regular season games. Started off this year strong, obviously against FCS team in Fordham, but there's just a lot of momentum building for the program right now.
I look at their schedule right now, and the opener against Fordham is such an outlier compared to the rest of the way they start. As we said, they got a bye week sandwiched in between trips to Penn State and Texas A&M, 2 ranked teams in the power conferences. But can you kind of talk us through what you witnessed week 1 last Thursday night against Fordham? It was a 41-17 victory. I know Bowling Green got out to a 20-0 lead by the end of that first quarter. So what went right for Bowling Green, and ultimately kind of what did you learn about the program through that first matchup?
Yeah, well, it all started with the opening kickoff. I mean, a remarkable way to start the season. Transfer running back Justin Pegues takes the opening kickoff 100 yards for a touchdown. So that's one way to start the season, and that was pretty exciting for them. Offensively, they just ran the ball extremely well. 305 rushing yards. They have a pretty stud running back, Terrion Stewart. Not very tall. He's listed at 5'9", which might be pretty generous, but he's 220 pounds, really rock solid. Unbelievable ability of breaking tackles. He's one of the best in the nation as far as his ability to break tackles. He had 160 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns against Fordham. So they really wanted to run the ball, and that's exactly what they did. They have offensive line has in the Scott Loeffler era has kind of been a question mark over the years, but this year they're huge in their experience. I think they averaged 6'6" and about 314 along the line, which is definitely one of the biggest they've had in a while. So the running game especially is what they want to be able to lean on.
You mentioned Stewart having that big game out of the gates, 160, 3 touchdowns on the ground. I'm curious, when you try to carry over what you saw against an FCS opponent into a matchup against a top 10 team nationally, what do you think can still work despite the clear jump in athletic competition they're going to face this Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, BG's offense, they run some interesting plays. I mean, I think they can find a little bit of success in the passing game. They have a very experienced quarterback in Connor Bazelak. He used to play in the Big Ten as well with Indiana. A great tight end in Harold Fannin. It's obviously going to be hard to move the ball against Penn State. I mean, obviously Penn State has an outstanding defense, but BG might be able to find a little bit of success offensively. Defensively, they have some playmakers as well at each level. They led the country last year in forced turnovers, or tied for the lead with 28 forced turnovers. So there's not many weaknesses for this BG team, but obviously going up against a top 10 team, there's going to be a lot of struggles. I mean, it's going to be, there's a huge talent gap, obviously, but they might be able to string together some good plays, some good drives, and maybe could make things interesting right away. But obviously, it is a pretty tough challenge for them.
When you kind of be realistic about this team and in this matchup, what are some particular areas that you just think are going to be very difficult for them to overcome, and that are going to be ultimately kind of the David and Goliath part of the story?
Yeah, I think maybe at some of the skill positions like wide receiver, BG has some new faces in at wide receiver. I mean, they're definitely solid, but I mean, Penn State obviously, really solid defensively as well, and offensively, it's going to be interesting. Just Penn State's offensive line versus BG's defensive line. I mean, BG has some good size and a ton of experience on the D line. But like last year, Michigan ran the ball extremely well against them. We're able to really move them. So I think line play is just going to be enormous, and even vice versa. BG's offensive line versus Penn State's defensive line. I mean, that's where it's going to be won. In the trenches. I mean, they have to do well along the line on both sides if they want to have a chance.
Are there any injury issues that we need to be aware of in terms of availability for Bowling Green? And are there any players on in any phase of the game that you think could be X factors for if they step up and deliver in kind of a spotlight game?
Yeah, injury wise, going into this week, it's hard to tell, but they did have a couple pretty significant injuries or players who missed week 1 against Fordham. The backup quarterback Camden North, who sees a decent amount of playing time, especially in running situations. He was out for the game. Linebacker Demetrius Hardiman had a really scary injury, season-ending injury at Michigan last year. He came back, but he was out for the game as well. They brought in a transfer wide receiver from Kansas State, RJ Garcia II, who is expected to have a huge role this year, and he was in either a boot or a cast on his leg. So if any of those three are out, then I think that can make a little bit of a difference. And then players as far as X factors, I think, obviously they're star players. I think they're going to get the ball a lot. They're going to try to get the running back Terrion Stewart involved. They really want to get Harold Fannin Jr., first team All MAC tight end. They really want to get him involved. But maybe a sleeper is a guy like wide receiver Malcolm Johnson Jr. He just transferred from Auburn. I think he's played Penn State a couple times in the past. He has that experience against power conference teams. He could be someone that they try to get the ball to a lot, especially out wide.
The quarterback position, I always find that if a team's going to go on the road like this and have a chance, it's because their quarterback is primed and ready for the moment. Not necessarily to throw for 400 yards, but to protect the football, to keep the chains moving, to keep Penn State's offense off the field. What can you tell us about that position? Because kind of a classic case of a journeyman here from Missouri to Indiana and now to Bowling Green.
Yeah, it's wild. This is his 6th college football season. He was the co-freshman of the year in the SEC way back in 2020, which seems like an eternity ago. He's Connor Bazelak he's had a lot of good moments, and he's not going to be the guy that throws for 300 yards and 5 touchdowns every game, but the BG, for the most part, they don't really need him to. They have weapons around him, especially in the run game. Defensively, they have, and special teams as well. So they just need him to be able to manage the game and not turn the ball over. And during this good stretch for BGSU, he has taken care of the ball. The season opener last year at Liberty, he threw 3 interceptions. A couple games later, threw 2 interceptions. But in his last 9 games overall, he only has thrown 2 interceptions. So he's done a great job of taking care of the ball. And they absolutely have to do that against Penn State. They can't expect to turn it over 2-3 times and to have a chance. So he's done so much better at just managing the game, just finding the open guy and not trying to force anything. And that's obviously going to be key this weekend.
Class of 2019, still lingering in college football, about 10,000 passing yards almost in his career, 48 touchdowns, 34 interceptions. Let's start to wrap up here with you, Michael. I'm going to kind of set the moment up for you here a little bit. Bowling Green comes to Beaver Stadium, makes Penn State sweat it out, has everybody taking blood pressure medication across the Nittany Lions fan base. If ...
If BG can take care of the ball and force turnovers, which obviously Penn State does a great job of taking care of the ball, but BG absolutely has to win the turnover battle to have any chance. Last year against Michigan, they picked off J.J. McCarthy 3 times, which I think stunned everybody in the college football world, and that helped them stay in the game, especially in the first half. They were only down 14-6. I think it was 7-6 at one point. So they absolutely have to win the turnover battle, and the line play on both sides it has to be perfect for them. Especially offensively, they're maybe going to try to run the football. Terrion Stewart, the running back, is their best offensive threat, and they really need him to be efficient. So I would say just the line play overall and taking care of the football.
And let's finish with this one. Still a few days out, but I'm curious if you're ready to give us your projection for how this one plays out and a final score.
Yeah, I think I think BG is going to come out energized. I think they're definitely going to make some plays, both sides of the ball. But the fact of the matter is, Penn State's a top 10 team for a reason. I think BG can maybe have a little bit of success. It might be hard to get points. Maybe they have a big special teams play. They have blocked a lot of kicks over the last few years. One of the best teams in that regard in the country. But I think the talent gap is going to be too much. I think Penn State, as far as the score, I would expect something around the 38, maybe 38-7, 38-10, something like that.
Well, Michael, really appreciate your perspective, and we look forward to welcoming you to Beaver Stadium, as I said, for this matchup. Michael Burwell covers Bowling Green for the Toledo Blade. Thanks for the time.
Yep, thank you again for having me.
So there you have it, an early look towards Saturday's matchup, noon kickoff in Beaver Stadium as Bowling Green makes its way to Beaver Stadium, the first of 4 consecutive home matchups for the Nittany Lions after they opened the year on the road at West Virginia. There will be a bye week in the mix that will actually follow this week. So it looks like a manageable portion of the schedule, but as Michael laid out there, Bowling Green is not going to come to campus just to roll over. So we'll find out how the Nittany Lions deal with maybe a little bit of a drop in enthusiasm around their second matchup compared to the first one. But it's again that they are favored by more than 4 touchdowns. We'll talk about that more in our next episode of the podcast when we do our full preview of Penn State's second game. Between now and then, we will get back out to the Nittany Lions practice field. Not only will we get a chance to see Penn State in action as it prepares for game 2, but we will also hear from head coach James Franklin and a variety of players around this program. In fact, we've already heard from a few players this week. Head over to lions247.com for the latest updates from those discussions from game week number 2. Before you heard from Tyler Calvaruso breaking down the recruiting world for Penn State, which right now is in a pretty rosy situation following a couple of pickups for that 2025 recruiting class. We'll keep tabs on the visitors who come to campus this Saturday, and coming out of their experiences, we'll get a bunch of reaction as Penn State tries to make a bunch of good impressions on Beaver Stadium attendees Saturday afternoon. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.